Hello everyone, welcome to Within the Frame. I'm Kim Bo-kyung. Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine is already entering its third year. Kyiv was receiving support from Western allies from the start of the war, which enabled Ukrainian forces to keep pushing back against Russia's offensives. But after the failure of Ukraine's counteroffensive last year, the war has been deadlocked for some time, causing allies to face fundamental questions on the sustainability of such financial support for Kyiv. How do experts see this war and the geopolitical changes around it? And how do they forecast it to be? For this, we invite Professor Lim Eun-jung from Gwangju National University. Professor Lim, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
And we also have Hanna HOPKO, co-founder of the International Center for Ukrainian Victory. Hanna was also the former head of the Foreign Affairs Committee of the Ukrainian Parliament. Good to have you with us, Hanna.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
All right, first question, Professor Lim. Already 2 years have passed since the outbreak of the Ukraine war. Now, before we get to the details, I would like to ask what economic and geopolitical impact or change this war has brought up to the world. Could you tell us?
Sure. Russia and Ukraine, these two countries are, of course, the two largest countries in the European continent. And Russia, obviously, it does have the largest gas reserve and a very natural resource-rich country, Ukraine as well. Ukraine has provided, such an important, substantial amount of the food to the rest of the world. So this specific war, it does have very huge impact, especially to the field of energy and the food security. Again, if I just take the energy sector, again, the gas, European continent, especially the Western European industrialized countries, they have been dependent on the Russian natural gas, but ever since the war erupted, they have been trying to reduce their dependency on the Russian natural gas. Because of that, again, they have changed their import routes, and then now the United States became the top largest natural gas exporter to the rest of the world, and absolutely the European countries, their imports from the United States has been rising too. So what I'm trying to say is, again, all this gas-related geopolitics has changed this pretty much significantly again ever since the war. And of course, the food security issue, it did make a huge impact to the price, again, the inflation. Before the war erupted, as we all remember, the COVID-19 pandemic, it did last for years, and then most of the countries could not but ease the quantity. So many countries in the world, they already got the pretty abundant cash flow in the market. So this war actually accelerated all this kind of inflation issue in many countries. So some economically weaker countries, they are suffering from so-called stagflation situations. Again, they have inflation at the same time economically their economies are pretty much recessed or like even stagnated. So, of course, again, Russia, as one of the P5 members of the United Nations Security Council, they violated the UN Charter's philosophy spirit. This is absolutely important, how would you say, thing we need to remember. But geopolitically also, and geoeconomically also, and economically too, it did make many of those ramifications to the rest of the world, I would say.
All right, I see. Thank you for your explanation, Professor Lim. Now, getting to the details now, Hanna, we first need to talk about the war on the ground. The town of Avdiivka was an area on the front line that Ukrainian forces managed to hold just until February 17th, when they withdrew troops from the area. How do you see what Ukrainian forces have done for the past 2 years?
So thank you for inviting me, because it's really important to mention that the war started, the Russian aggression against Ukraine, in 2014 from the illegal annexation of Crimea Peninsula. So it's already 10 years But back in 2014, it was Russia alone invading Ukraine. In 2024, covering the deficit, Russian army is terrorizing Ukrainian civilians, Ukrainian critical infrastructure by using shells and missiles from North Korea, also using kamikaze drones from Iran. So now it's Russia, China, North Korea, Iran, and desovereignization of Belarus already happened. So this is the coalition of authoritarian states helping Russia to keep terrorizing Ukrainians and sending more missiles, ballistic cruise missiles, modern kinzhals, using electronic warfare against Ukrainians. So on your question on Avdiivka, it's important to mention that losing battle doesn't mean losing the war. Because within this period of full-scale genocidal war period, so in 2022, Ukraine successfully returned control of Kherson city and partially Kharkiv region in southern part of Ukraine during the successful counteroffensive. So 2023, Ukrainian armed forces demonstrated creativity when we actually keep continuous sending our grain through the grain corridor in the Black Sea, when we used maritime drones to destroy Russian Navy. Can you imagine Ukraine without Navy? We destroyed around 40% of Russian Navy big military ships, which were using also to send missiles to the different cities in Ukraine. And 2024, we do hope to receive F-16, more long-range missiles, especially after the news when Iran made this decision to provide 400 ballistic missiles to Russia. And I think we prove that we are a very resilient country. We keep fighting and expecting that our Western friends will finally wake up and provide us more weapons needed to continue battlefield progress with liberation of our territories.
All right. Well, I believe it is important for us to note that losing one battle does not mean losing a war entirely. Now, Professor Lim, staying on Russia's Avdiivka capture, Russia said Ukraine's withdrawal from Avdiivka was an unconditional success. However, according to the Telegraph, Russia lost 17,000 troops since May in order to take the regime. Now, regarding this, many say Putin did it with the presidential election in mind. How do you see this?
Well, of course, their presidential election is coming, within like 1 month. I mean, we will see anyhow the result. Of course, many just think anyhow that Putin will be winning the presidential election, but how large his victory gonna be, that might remain as, how would you say, as a kind of, question mark. But having said that, again, I truly appreciate the other panelists. Again, the Ms. HOPKO's that very impressive comment, losing one battlefield is not, that does not necessarily mean the losing the war. I was very much impressed by that comment. But anyhow, ever since the war erupted, again, both countries financially and the human resources too, as long as these war lasts for years, again, both sides, again, will be, suffering financially, and they keep losing their own precious people. So how can just, we conclude, the international society, to conclude this tragedy? It is still very much, we don't have very clear answer about that. But however, anyhow, the presidential election is one thing, and as long as, their regime is an authoritarian regime, again, his victory is pretty much likely. But again, as I said, how large it's going to be and how the international society will interpret that presidential election result will stay, I think, remain as a question mark on the table.
All right, I see your point. Now, I'd like to also tap on domestic politics, Hannah, for this. Ukraine was embroiled in controversy as just 2 weeks ago, Zelensky announced the dismissal of top commander Valery Zaluzhny. How did the Ukrainians see this event?
So, of course, Ukrainians love Zaluzhny, and he's the most popular general in Ukraine. And of course, when he left, so this was really important to understand who will replace Zaluzhny and what is the strategy, what is the military strategy of Ukraine to win. So the key is here, and now we see how political and military leadership of Ukraine are working together on the law on mobilization, because we need to rotate the defenders who are already 2 years in trenches. Plus, we also are working on to decrease the conscriptancy age from 27 years old to down. And also we need to win the war using technological advanced weapon. And one of the successes I mentioned in the Black Sea, it's happened because of the maritime drones. So as previously General Zaluzhny mentioned, to win the war with Russia, we need to obtain the modern technologies. And I'm very thankful to those countries who are donating to our military, in particular South Korea, Japan, Norway, UK, because we need to change our strategy and actually understand that we cannot compete with Russia on the manpower. Russia is 4 times bigger by population, so they could send more and more men as a cannon fodder. When we value every life of our defender, this is why we need now to localize defense industries and also to do this technological mobilization with more drones, more electronic warfare, and actually keep progressing in the Black Sea, demilitarizing Russian presence, and actually guarantee that we are the food security guarantor in the world, because Ukraine belongs still to the top 5 of the world agriculture producer. And we don't want to see how people in global South countries, especially in Africa, are suffering because of the weaponization of hunger. It's the same tactic during Soviet Union Stalin used against Ukrainians, organizing man-made famine, Holodomor, genocide, and now Russia wants, by daily destroying our farmers' lands, sending missiles, they don't want Ukrainian farmers to feed the world. And actually, I'm working now on the big campaign, Make Russia Pay. It's a campaign to confiscate Russian central bank money, 300 billions of US dollars. And we want part of this money of confiscated Russian assets to buy food, grain in Ukrainian farmers and to deliver it to African countries.
All right, I see your point. Well, Professor Liv, I'd like to also tap on the recent death of Russian opposition figure Alexei Navalny, which triggered the U.S. to soon announce a major sanctions package against Russia. Now, what impact is this going to have on the war?
Well, as the war lasts longer than expected, again, even the Western allies or Western like-minded countries among themselves, we did see some kind of, again, the differences or like gaps, perception gaps even between them, which is pretty much understandable. For example, here in East Asia, again, Japan is an archipelago like the United Kingdom. And from their point of view, again, the China as a continental power is a huge kind of threat or challenge to them. And South Korea, of course, we did have a fight with the PRC before. However, economically, we have cooperated with the PRC for many years. And then from our point of view, again, kind of, perception about the threat from China was slightly different from the perception of threat of Japan. So likewise, again, I do see a kind of, even though it is not that much significant difference, but we still see a kind of difference between for example, United Kingdom and the United States. U.S. is, out of the region, and U.S., of course, Europe is absolutely one of the most important regions from the Washington's point of view. However, from Washington's point of view, this whole era is more about the competition with China. So they definitely need to care about this region too. So as long as we do see a kind of, that kind of strategic perception gaps between the Western allies, it was probably a little difficult to focus, to concentrate our efforts to back up the Ukraine. But I'm terribly sorry about Mr. Navalny's death, but probably thanks to that event, it looks like now Western societies are more heading to the kind of how would you say, they are trying to reunite their own efforts to back up the Ukraine. The sanctions itself, I'm terribly sorry to say that too, but sanctions itself, as long as Russia can find out an alternative like China or like India, they have both, Russian gas, with a pretty affordable price for the last couple of years. So how effective the sanction per se gonna be? It can be a little, doubtful, but still, I do see a kind of political impact of that specific event.
All right, I see. Well, our Professor Lim mentioned how there's a strategic perception gaps even among the Western allies. And so I'd like to ask Hannah about this. You see, as a matter of fact, there were many reports that Washington is actually considering shifting its strategy regarding the Ukraine war, turning to a more defensive posture than driving Russia from Ukraine. And also the EU, it had been steadfast supporter of Ukraine, but now it is showing quite a negative view of the war. Now, how the Ukrainians are viewing this?
So I want to continue this Navalny death because I think it's important actually if we mention the Prigozhin rebellion in June 2023. So that suggests that Putin's regime is very vulnerable. And actually, if it loses the war in Ukraine, it's likely to fall apart. So I think the West should not underestimate Russia, but it should not overestimate it either. And I just returned from the Munich Security Conference, and I want to see that I saw the shift of narratives and paradigm from Ukraine not losing to Ukraine winning, because many generals and ministries of defense of the UK, Germany, they are now telling that NATO should be prepared to the war with Russia in next 2, 3, 5, 7 years, or even earlier. So it seems like generals in Europe and NATO, they understand that devastation might go beyond Ukrainian border, and this challenge of land operations will happen also in the NATO territory. Remember, everyone was telling every inch of NATO should be protected. But Ukraine cannot be a shield for Europe forever. This is why we need to get more weapons, and actually the most skilled armed forces, like Ukrainian armed forces, we want to contribute to the security of the European continent. And at the Munich Security Conference, we heard from the Prime Minister of Denmark, President of Czech Republic, saying that we need to ramp up production faster to deliver these shells to Ukraine, because look we are ashamed that North Korea alone provided more shells and ballistic rockets than G7 countries and the EU together. But if you look at economic situation in Russia or economic perspective, so Russian economy ranks between Spain and Italy. When NATO countries, they have like 50% of the global, of the world GDP, yes? So this is, I think, it's a time to help Ukraine to win, to defeat Russian imperialism as a deterrence, as a signal to China and other authoritarian states not to allow China actually to behave like Russia concerning Taiwan on, or South China Sea or some other places in the Pacific. So now there is a more understanding of geopolitical importance of Ukraine defeating Russia.
All right. Well, I understand Ukrainians' point of view that Ukraine cannot be a shield for NATO forever, and that they always have to notice the battle could go beyond the Ukrainian border. All right. Now, before I wrap up this show, I'd like to ask this last question to our Professor Lim. Now that this war is moving into its third year, I'd like to ask how the situation might unfold. Now, what are the possible scenarios, Professor?
Well, I'm very sorry, but I don't have a really clear answer for that specific question. The biggest, the most critical variable this year is, as we all probably agree, again, the U.S. presidential election. You know, liberal democracy, we are much more, I believe, much more resilient than the authoritarian regime. However, authoritarian dictatorship, they can be sometimes very, very much more decisive than us. So, you know, this year, whole year will be about, again, the Biden versus Trump, who's going to be you know, living in the White House for the coming 4 years. So, you know, as long as this question, you know, remains as the biggest question for the rest of the rest of the year, so probably the war situation can remain pretty much vague too. I'm again very sorry, but I truly again appreciate, and I'd love to, personally, I'd love to support, you know, those Ukrainian spirit to fight.
I cannot agree more, and I stand by Ukrainians as well. Now, unfortunately, this is all the time we have for today's edition. Thank you, Professor Lim and Hannah, for your time and insights today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
God bless our victory, and thank you for support.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, that's all for Within the Frame tonight. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.